I don't know that.
This James City County Board of Supervisors budget work session to order. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Porter. If you'll call the roll.
Mr. Hempel? Here. Mr. Eisenhower? Here. Mr. McGlinnan? Here. Ms. Saddle?
Here.
Ms. Larson?
Here.
All present.
Thank you.
Are we doing this one now, too? You're here? Called to order this meeting of the James City Service Authority Board of Directors. Mr. Powell?
Mr. Eisenhower? Here. Mr. McGlinnan?
Here.
Mr. Hempel?
Here.
Ms. Larson?
Here.
Ms. Saddle?
Here.
All right. With that, we will start our budget discussion. Mr. Porter?
Yes, we have Jason is going to give a presentation on the relationship really between the budget and the strategic plan and the initiatives with it. And we will have fire. We'll follow it up with some things from fire and police based on some of the things that came up from the citizens' comments.
Okay.
In the end, we want to talk to you about what you would like to have us prepare for you for the 24th.
All right. Sounds good. Mr. Purse?
Great. Well, as we were putting together the budget, we wanted to tie in the strategic plan as often as we could. When we approved this last year, we put in a number of capital and operational initiatives, and we tried to, particularly with the budget message and the departmental divisional pages, really tried to incorporate a lot of that language. But I think there might have been a little miscommunication, so we wanted to make sure that you all understood exactly how we were presenting it and how all of those terms were incorporated into the budget. So when we came up with the strategic plan, we identified the 7 goal areas, and that was really to drive the policy and the decisions that the board made in the budget document to help us achieve our future vision. So we were able to pull in our very long-range plans, the comprehensive plan, the Parks and Rec master plan, the housing studies, and all of those sorts of things. We were able to pull items from that plan, put them in the strategic plan as those operational or capital items. So for instance, when we're looking at something like the long-term water supply, obviously what we're ultimately trying to get to is a sustainable long-term water supply. The operational and capital items that come underneath that are supposed to help us get there. It's a roadmap. There's a little bit of flexibility there. Things we identified when we were putting this plan together, that wasn't the final list of items that we were going to try to do. Obviously, we want to get to that goal. How we get there, I think, is what we are using this budget document for. So, for instance, when we were putting together this 2-year budget, Doug and his team identified the Long Hill Road, News Road betterment project. So that is going to, Doug, actually, maybe it'd probably be a good idea for you to come up here to talk a little bit about what that project is. But that wasn't something that was originally identified specifically as a project in the strategic plan, but it's something that helps us get to that #1 goal, the sustainable long-term water plan.
The Long Hill Road project, again, as Jason said, that's a new CIP project. The Long Hill Road project is simply, we're going to increase the size of the water line in that area in conjunction with the VDOT project that's going on there. This is a project of opportunity. We can do this much more cheaply because we only have to pay for the increase in the size of the pipe. Since VDOT is going to be working in the area anyway, we don't incur all the costs, the excavation, those sorts of things. So we can take advantage of that project and work in partnership with VDOT to accomplish that at a much cheaper price than we would otherwise. The concept is same for the other project. That project is another year away, further down the road. But it's the same concept. We can do that much more cheaply because it's in conjunction with the VDOT project.
So that was another project that we were able to work on that met some of our strategic plan goals. The modern infrastructure, the transportation project side of it, we were able to identify and get the money for the Long Hill Road project. So we were able to then do this JCSA project to sort of build off on that. So that's sort of an example of something that we're reacting, right? The strategic plan was set out, but in order to meet that goal, we've identified other opportunities along the way that we're able to put in the budget and try to tell that story through the budget and have you all, the board, decide whether or not that's the direction that's going to sort of get us to the future. One of the other projects that I think Doug and his team are working on that he's been talking with you about are the water meter replacements. That's, you know, the modern infrastructure. That's making sure we have all the things in place for our citizens to be able to get the most from their water system, to be able to pay on a timely manner and have accurate readings and things like that. So those are things that we've identified that don't necessarily show up on this page of the strategic plan where we listed the initial items. There's been a lot of talk about the 46 and then 55 operational initiatives we have. And I think folks are looking at it like a checkbox, making sure that we're accomplishing as much as we can. Not everything was in this document, so we're trying to tell the story, like I said, through the budget. And it's not as easy as just saying, you know, we're doing the first three things on this project list. I think one of the other areas where we've really tried to get to that is through exceptional public service. And this really deals a lot with our police and our fire service. There has been a lot discussed with this budget about a new police zone, a 6th zone and with the police, and then a 6th fire station as well. So in order to bring those online in 3 years, there have been a couple things we need to do ahead of time. It's more on the operation side, right? So we have the capital project in 2021 to build a fire station number 6. Before we can figure out where that station is going to go or actually build the station, we have to bring the firefighters online. And I'm hoping Ryan can come up and talk a little bit about that process. And
Thank you. So we looked at opportunities for adding 18 additional firefighters to be ready for the opening of Fire Station 6, projected to open in fiscal year 23. We talked to you about before in previous meetings about our overtime expenditures and due to staffing levels and turnover and things that in the fiscal year 18 budget, when we implemented those pay changes, we've seen a significant downturn in turnover. Our overtime spending has dropped. But we want to also make sure we're maintaining that. We're looking at projected retirements between now and the opening of that fire station. We're seeing 1 or 2, maybe 3 a year expected until fiscal year 21. And we see a rapid drop, probably as many as 11 that year. So trying to compensate for our normal overtime, or excuse me, our normal turnover through retirements, then try to absorb 11 on top of turn around the next year and expect to hire 18 people to open the fire station was very difficult. Additionally, we have trouble with, we participate in regional fire academies, who the same kind of staffing issues are facing the entire region. And it's routine for an academy to have 30 plus people. So now we stick, you know, somewhere between 2 and maybe 8 into an academy to try to put 9, 10, 18, or in the case of trying to compensate from 11 retirements plus 18 new hires, 29 people in maybe a 2 fiscal year period. Very difficult for us to get those trained. From start to finish of the training is at least 9 months, sometimes a little more than that. So we looked to lay out a plan of how we could slowly increase our staffing between now and the opening of the fire station for 2 reasons. One, to offset what we just talked about, actually getting them trained, and to not take a huge dip in fiscal year 21 below our back. We gave you a staffing goal number that we could keep our line above that goal. We didn't have huge overtime. So we want to try to keep that so we can absorb those retirements without dropping below our normal staffing line. And the second is to look at other opportunities like implementing a additional medic unit, probably out of Fire Station 4, simply for placement reasons and availability to have a place to park it and house the folks in anticipation of opening Station 6. That medic unit could offset some of the use of mutual aid we have from the city of Williamsburg. We typically see most of the mutual aid into Fire Station 3 and 4's area. That's our busiest two districts. They're about neck and neck. Station 4 frequently backs up Station 3, and then Williamsburg comes in. So adding another medic unit there could take care of that. So we looked at a plan of how we could phase that in, absorb some of those, but end up plus 18 at the end. The other problem we ran into was in 1980, we did a kind of an expansion, opens Fire Station 3 and 4 in 80 and 81, did a large hire. We did again in 1995, we did again in 1999, and now we potentially are doing that again. So we've seen the effects of the 1980 hire. We're seeing the effects in 21 of the 1995 hire. We're going to see the 1999 hire in fiscal year 24-25. We're going to turn around and I'm going to hand that off to whoever the next fire chief is and recreate that problem again if we were to hire all 18 in a year. So we're trying to have some folks ready at the 4-year, 3-year, 2-year, 1-year training, so their training is up, and then also we don't recreate that retirement issue down the road. So we looked at a phased-in approach, kind of slowly increasing the staffing. Obviously, it's going to take dips along the way with those retirements. There's always people leave that we're not sure they're going to leave, change careers. If the military starts hiring again, that tends to pull some folks away. And then we always deal with FMLA and light duty from injuries and things. So even though we're adding overall authorized positions, the available staffing line will not see that rapid of an increase. So we're hoping that even with that dip in fiscal year 21, we end up plus 18 people ready for the station to open up in the fall of calendar year 22, which would be the beginning of fiscal year 23.
So backing it up even more, when we're looking at goal number 5, and it talks about the county will maintain a safe environment for its residents. I mean, I think response time is something that we've heard of. It's also the number of calls that we receive in an area. We need to make sure that, we have the resources in a specific area of the county to be able to reach those folks in a timely manner. So in order to plan ahead and stay ahead, like Ryan said, we know we have a need in a couple years to start planning for it. We need to do everything we can. But if you go down and look at the operational initiatives, there's nothing specifically on there about adding additional firefighters or adding an additional fire station. But clearly it's something that we need to do in order to meet the overall, statements in the goal. So we had received a couple questions about that, so I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. I'd also note that this is a 5 to 10 year document. So just because we're not doing something in this first budget cycle doesn't mean that we're not going to get to it. We obviously have limited resources. So we're trying to hit the things with the most and the greatest need for our community in this first 2-year budget cycle. This is really the first opportunity we've had to incorporate some of these operational initiatives in. The other big public safety one that really gets to providing assistance to the county is the police. The police have an additional zone coming online here, hopefully in 2 years, and I'm hoping Chief Reinheimer can talk to us a little bit about that.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. First. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And I know you've all been hearing this for a couple of years now about the need to add a 6th police zone. And the 3 positions that we're asking for in FY19 would get us halfway there. The other 3 are asked in FY20 to allow us to add that 6th additional police zone. We've given presentations and we've talked about some of the reasoning behind it. Our calls for service continue to go up, particularly in that part of the county, the middle part of the county, the Monticello, Long Hill, Richmond Road, Old Town, Centerville type of area, where our zones there are seeing nearly double what some of our other police zones are seeing. So we're asking to be able to create that 6th zone so we can split that up to help both with response times and just call volume. The activity of the officers, what we see, and we've seen it over the past few years, the proactive part of what we do is going down because the reactive stuff is going up. Officers aren't able to do a lot of the things that we do that we take a lot of pride in our department to educate citizens, to prevent crime, to do a lot of the things that we like to do, and what I think really separates us from some other departments. We're seeing less and less time to be able to do that. So this will also allow us to hopefully get back into doing some of that. So we hope to be able to add that additional police zone in FY20.
And just if I can follow up on the discussion at last night's forum, presumably we're recognizing that we're sort of adding to both police and fire at this point and have the additional expense of the training for that first year. When we do hires, generally that is part of the overall operating budget that would roll forward then. So we would see a differential impact just for while we're bringing on these new staff members, but then it would get back to kind of normal.
Sure. And the first year for police positions, the new officer, the first year is about $135,000 because it includes the equipment, everything, their vehicle, everything that's in the vehicle. There's a lot that comes with it. The second year and beyond, the price is reduced about in half to around $65,000.
So when we're talking about some of the other things that have gone into this budget, I think you'll notice some threads as you go through the different department pages. You'll sort of see some themes, might not necessarily tie to the operational initiatives, but under each of the sections, we have a comment section for the divisions where we try to tell our whole story. Obviously, not everything is in the strategic plan. These were generally considered new initiatives that we were doing, but it doesn't touch the day-to-day work that we do day in and day out. Those services don't stop. Police and fire are a really good example of that, but it's also stormwater. Stormwater has inspections that they have to do regularly. That doesn't stop because we're doing a project for the Toano outfall, where we're designing a new system. They still have to go to the facilities that we have. So we've tried to tell that story in the budget as well. So along with the strategic plan, we've tried to build in some metrics and some narrative to describe how we're meeting sort of these overall goals. Because clearly, just because it's not a capital project or an operational initiative doesn't mean that we're not doing things to meet modern infrastructure. I think a lot of what we have talked with you about with the new the software for building safety and permits and community development overall is clearly a modern infrastructure technology improvement that we've made that might not necessarily have a specific operational initiative attached to it.
All right.
I think next what we wanted to do is to see if you have your proposed budgets from what the county administrator had proposed. And we know that there is going to be changes to that. We hopefully will know tomorrow and at least be able to get the legislation maybe by the next day to make sure that we are full understanding of that. But if you had any questions on the document, if there were certain areas that you had a question, and then additionally, if you all as a board had anything that you wanted us to be looking into to be bringing back, because we do believe there will be changes to that. So if there isn't the information that you need in this document, you need us to prepare something for your next work session. We would like to know what that is and be able to help you in your decision-making process.
And then we can get some kind of direction. We can prepare you some options for what happens when we find out what happens with the amended SB 942, whether it's amended even further or whether it stays the way it is. To be able for you all to give us some direction, and we will come back with some options for you.
So I would think one of the questions, we really don't need to be trying to deal with the details until we know what's going to happen. But in just in general, I think what I would like to have you all prepared to come back and talk to us about a little bit. The budget, as it's set, basically has $5.5 million, which was what was originally there, built into the revenue, apparently for both years, and then, of course, into the expenditures for both years. And I think what I would like to see is if we were able to separate that, because if the budget had been built, as if the budget had been built in the absence, if you will, of the revenue from the Senate Bill 942. So the basic revenue, not counting that, and what the basic expenses were. Because what I want to look at is when we're going forward, I want to make sure that if we're going to be spending this money, and I'd like to personally, we can get to that debate later, but I'd like to personally see us spend that money on non-recurring items and not get used to where we are using that money for things that are going to be in the budget recurring year to year going forward, if you will, in perpetuity. Now, I recognize that there were some things that you had mentioned, like you said, well, we were going to do some of the fire positions, and we had it built into the budget. This was an opportunity to bring it forward.
Yes.
And I said, okay, fine. But what the problem is, what's murky now is that with the revenue built into the next year's budget, it's a little hard. You see what I'm saying? It's a little harder to figure out, okay, what was that revenue dedicated towards? And it makes a difference in how I look at things going forward. I would be maybe willing to do something that would move something up a year, as long as we weren't relying on that revenue on a continuing basis. That it would then transition, if you will, into the normal revenue of the budget. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay.
I was kind of thinking along the same lines, and I don't know how practical this is, but even if we had, because we were asked to look at the budget prior to page A2, I don't want to say that legislation name or somebody might get mad at me. It's hard to do because it's already in there. So if we had a supplemental page, even to go along with any page that had that included in there, so we can kind of compare, what was and what now could be based on that legislation. That's what I think would help me quite a bit.
So I want to try to understand this a little bit more, because first of all, I don't know that if this is approved, that realistically it's going to change anytime in the near future. But let's also recognize that, first of all, that Bill's made a recommendation, and it's the county administrator's recommendation. We're going to make a determination about where it's going to be. The single largest recurring commitment that he's recommended is a reduction in taxes. So are we going to think about that the same way? Because if we're not, then we're kind of treating this funding in a very different kind of way. If that legislation went away, presumably we would have to be thinking about where we're going to replace that revenue. And so, I think it is a question for us to be keeping in mind as we go forward. And also, let's recognize we're not talking about 5.5 million anymore in all likelihood. It's probably more like 4.9. Is that right, Sue?
Yes.
Yeah. And let's not also forget that we're talking about $1 million in tax relief compared to the original legislation, because we've eliminated the grocery tax, and another $412,000 coming back because we're shifting revenue off of the general taxpayer to the overnight stays. So let's keep those numbers in mind as we think about all this.
Thing that worries me, with any new legislation, especially when we were told this may not be around very long. And John and I are the only two that were left from the last round of tax increase. And none of us wanted to do it. And like always, you've got to do what you got to do to keep the doors open. And by doing that, we all took hits on that board by doing, raising the taxes, but we found that in the long run, it was the best thing to do at that time to get us back and get the ship righted back where it should be and pay down debt and do what we need to do. And it was a good business move. Now, nobody wants to pay taxes, and everybody hates the word taxes, myself included, but it's part of life. I just don't want to see if we do the 2 cent today and this legislation goes away next year, then we've got to go back and say we need the 2 cent back. Well, personally, as a taxpayer, I'd call y'all fools. Why'd you give me $30 or $60 or $66 for, this year, and you want 66 back in 2 years from now? And that's where, when the last time the board cut the taxes, I ended up with like $20 or something back on my taxes years ago. And I thought that was ridiculous when you've already taken it from me and given it back to me. Really, it irritated me personally. After a while, you get used to a certain thing, and you move forward. You've got to pay electrical be this much, heating oil is going to be this much, and you get used to paying a certain thing. I'm not advocating for any more taxes increase. I said the last one, we didn't need one for hopefully 10 years. We give this back, we may in 2 or 3 years need another one. And I'm sure the citizens will not be happy in 2 or 3 years. I've talked to quite a few of them that have told me, I'd rather you put the money into something that I can see how it's being used, not just drop it in there or put it somewhere where it can see how it's going to be used. I've said it since I got on this board, and I'll continue to say it even after I leave, is that we need a county building. We need a central county complex where we can put everything in the county in there. It needs to be in War Hill next to the police station. Police chief knows. And it needs to house everything. The school board, all our meetings, the community go to a central location and get everything they need in James City County in one spot. From the taxes to the treasurer, to the school board, to the county board, to your code and compliance, to your water, to your sewer, to everything. One central spot. And then we sell off the excess land that we have, and we turn that into that property as well and use that revenue as well for that property. And that will cut down vehicles, it'll cut down maintenance, it'll cut down lawn care, it'll cut down everything. It's amazing what we will save. Our savings will probably equal out to what our spending will be for that building in the long run, once we get rid of the properties and all that we have. And we'll centrally locate it ourselves and put a parking garage underneath it so our staff is safe and secure. If it's rain outside, they go downstairs in the parking garage, put everything in their vehicle, and they ride out. So I definitely want to see that, and I'm going to keep pushing for that one item as long as I can, because it's just smart business. And we've always not had the funding available to do that, and we've started looking at it as far as how can we do it and what can be done with it. If we dedicate those 2 cents towards that, it's something that we can show the community that we're saving money in the long run, but we're putting it into something that betters the community and it's user friendly for the community to be able to come to one spot. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I'd like to sort of chime in because I think I had a little bit of answer to both questions that John and Michael proposed. If this is, especially if we decide we want to give some of this back in property tax relief, I think it has to be with a clear understanding that it is contingent upon the revenue being there from this bill. And I think a given would be that if this bill goes away, we would have to raise that 2 cents back up. But remember, from the person's who's paying the bill, the 2 cents goes back up, but the 1% goes away if the bill goes away. So it's it's not like we're we're taking it out of one pocket and giving it back to another. It would be just reversing that process. So I don't see it as that much of a problem in people understanding that. As far as making things, talking about recurring, John, it's the same concept. It's that it's a recurring. It's there as long as that revenue is there. And if we can afford to continue giving that money back because we're getting the revenue from the sales tax, if it goes away, it reverses. It's not like we're building it in permanently into our normal routine. It's tied to that the existence of that revenue from the sales tax. So these are a couple of things that just. I understand the concern about recurring things being in there.
Well, yeah, I just point out, we had a campaign promise that was made back about almost 20 years, well, more than 20 years ago now, to eliminate the car tax, which, again, the state deciding what local governments would have the power or authority to do. So now every year we have a budget with $1 billion in it that is to pay the bill for reducing, not eliminating, reducing the car tax. And every year it becomes a smaller and smaller part of the tax rebate to the citizens. But every year it's also $1 billion that the state can't use to fund education properly or to do all the other things that they seem to be struggling to figure out a way to do. And so they tell us to figure out a way to do it.
I had a question on the moving forward. You talked about absorbing the police and fire into the operating budget. So some idea about what that would look like or where that's going to come from, or if we're going to have to not have something else. So or do you think it's going to be because of attrition that you're going to?
No, I think what I had heard is that looking to absorb the reoccurring into the budget, and we would be able to identify other non-reoccurring.
Okay.
As an example, in the next 2-year budget time, and then FY19 and FY20, we have almost double the amount of replacement police vehicles than normal.
Okay.
About $200,000 more than normal. So we could instead say we'll fund that additional $200,000 out of this money instead of the ongoing, because we know 2 years from now it's going to go back to the normal replacement schedule.
Okay.
So we would go through, I think, also the comprehensive plan. It is a one-time expenditure this year. It's within the normal budget, but we could shift it over so that it is just part of the one-time. So we could identify different items that are one-time items, and put the recurring items into the regular budget. The only one item that we wouldn't be able to do that with is it was a little bit less than $500,000 from this money that we had done to fully fund the schools. And because we can't tell the schools how to spend their money, that would be still there in the reoccurring as part of the sales tax.
Yeah, I don't want to take a step back on the public safety issue. So because this is something that we've been talking about, and so I want to make sure we're able to keep that.
So the figures that the chiefs gave us, were those figures number of people to hire? Were those figures coming from the chart on A2?
Yes.
Remember, those included additional costs for the upfront training and the outfitting and some of the other items. To be clear, that was always planned, or that we anticipated that because we knew we were going to have an additional fire station. We see a certain amount of growth every year, So those would have been able to be part of the operating budget in future years, regardless of if the sales tax money was still there. This just allows us to do it ahead of time.
Yeah, move it up.
Move it up. They would have been added in future years just as a part of that general growth that we see. We're just able to do it earlier because of this.
And that upfront cost without fitting it in.
So the recurring nature of it wouldn't be a part of the sales.
I guess one of the other things you could look at is, obviously, since this is not going to be 5.5, but something less, and depending upon what we decided we wanted to do with some of it, what I would be interested in seeing is a staff proposal of priorities. You know, given that you had X amount of dollars, what's your top priority? You know, what's your second? What's your third? You know, down the line, so that we can see what the most compelling things for you are.
So if you could, on the chart A2, since we're talking about that anyway, the high-quality education, the new buses, I think, were at $493, is that correct?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. And then could we at some point get a total of what the redesign of school entrances would be, which leaves us what the amount of operations, extra for operations would be?
It's about 425
For the entrances?
For the entrances, and about 480. I'm rounding in my head, so
You're better than I am.
about 480 for the operations.
And buses were
493.
And I guess I would have a question about how complex is the redesign of the school entrances? Is that something that all the schools is this divided up into 2 years worth of work, or is it this all to be done in 1 year?
I think it would all be done 1 year. They have been they've been planning them. There have been various ones each year. So we're at the tail end of where they're at. So the ones that would be moving forward are Laura Lane. That was about $93,000. James River was only about 40. Each one, I think, has different needs for the entrance. Stonehouse is 162, and Toano was about 130. So
those are the only schools that are left still to have their
yes, those are the ones that are moved up into 19 to be able to do that.
So there were already other schools planned for 19 before?
There were a few that were planned and were included in 19, and I probably included the list. Okay.
Yeah, I see Berkeley's.
Yeah, Berkeley and Lafayette were already planned, were part of their request for 19. And the previous budgets have funded school entrances.
So that extra in operations just goes to them.
That was the superintendent's proposed budget that included a variety of their school priorities, having to do with both increased enrollment and
could you, for our next session, could we just maybe take a look at what the remaining funds for schools has been over, say, the last 5 years?
Their surplus
Yes.
at the end of the year?
Because it seems to me that it's usually been in the $2 million range or plus. And that money then has been available for things like purchasing a bit of additional buses and like. I guess I'm still trying to fully understand the situation with buses since we were ahead of the replacement schedule. And while I recognize we're opening a new school, we haven't increased the land area of the county. so that I'm not quite sure how we match the need for additional buses, everything else, but just kind of.
Partly due to the redistrict, when they redistrict the middle school, the buses have to serve everybody plus
Right,
that.
right.
So I think that's part of what it is.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about what, as we prioritize, how that stands up in comparison to other needs.
Yeah, I thought they had said they were, I know that there's been leftover funds mainly due to retirement. Did they not budget for any last year, but then they still had some? I'm trying to remember. Can you find that out? I thought that well, you'll tell us when you give us the total.
So carryover money.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as a reminder, we do have programmed 600,000 of their leftover, whatever their surplus is. So whatever their surplus has been, we would need to subtract 600,000 because we withhold that to help fund their CIP in the next year.
Okay.
So
The on FY21, the 18 million that's set aside for as a placeholder for, I guess, school expansion.
yes.
Jason was explaining that to me today, and I just want to make sure I'm clear on that because what does it mean to have a placeholder in the budget?
It's recognizing that it's in the future year. Go ahead. He's got my back. That's okay.
I'm buzzing down here.
You didn't want me. Okay, the placeholder. The request from the school, the adopted CIP had in 3 different years the high school expansions. Okay. There is right now a working group that is looking at their space needs, and that plan may change. But in recognizing that there probably will be a need for some expansion, we wanted to at least put the placeholder in there so that way the board would be able to see that if this is needed, okay, and we were to borrow for this, we do have the capacity to pay for it without increasing taxes.
So a simple way to think about that is what we did with James Blair, where we're now taking $2.4 million from basically debt service and transferring it over to operations because we knew we would have that expense coming along at some future time, and in the meantime we could reduce our borrowing needs by accumulating money.
Yes, however, we have now programmed if there is operational, because we don't know what that's going to look like.
Right.
It may end up changing that they only want to expand one high school, okay, and so the dollar amount will change, and then we'll be able to shift that way. Just putting in there as a placeholder is sort of recognizing that they have identified a need that's out there, and that we would be able to fund that. Mm-hmm. But what that actually would look like will be defined, in a future year. Mm-hmm. Because it's in the plan, it's not being appropriated, okay? It's not until an appropriation that something actually takes place. I mean, we've had placeholders in the past with actually James Blair. I think it's been in and out, or expanded needs. So we put it in there as a generalization versus the school board request, which was 3 very specific requests that seem to be being relooked at or being finalized as to what that would actually be.
Is that as a result of them choosing not to redistrict, would you say?
I don't believe so, no. It's based on, because the request was for each high school to expand. So that wouldn't be because of redistricting. Okay.
And this goes back again to the the strategic plan document that we put together where, we've asked them to work on their CIP ahead of time so we don't have any last minute additions. We can put a plan in place, and then when we get to the year where we're actually discussing it, we can go into all the specifics like we did for James Blair about the number of projected students and the capacity of the existing schools.
So this is a concept that really appeals to me. I think we did it with War Hill High School as well, that we could have a kind of up and down of the revenue that we need to operate on a given basis. But if we know we're going to have this need coming down the line, and we can reduce some of the need to borrow because we're accumulating some funding for debt service, then you keep a very stable and reasonable level. You adjust it the more you know. That your need is going to be to staff a 600 student middle school, then you do that. If you need money for 1 or 2 or 3 expansions, or if you decide that you want a 4th high school instead, you know what the needs are and you can sort of plan for that.
I talked to a few of the school board members in our connection with Thomas Nelson, and there's a lot of the students now are going into college courses, and we could also do trade courses and partner with Thomas Nelson and build an addition on to Thomas Nelson, which will relieve our high schools, the pressure we have on high schools as we get them. And some of those students would be over there doing college courses, and that's one thing with Thomas Nelson, and where we could partner with them and help them build onto their facility while they manage it and all that for the students that we have that want to move quicker through their high school years into their college years. And when I was talking to some of them, I see more and more doing that, and coming out of high school, still in high school, but going to college courses. And we'll also open up our trades. It might be something we can start doing what we used to do with our trades. Maybe that can all be handled over Thomas Nelson, and something we could do a building that would relieve our high schools may not look at another high school.
When we gave the land to Thomas Nelson, there was a building at the end that was the campus that was across from War Hill High School. That was the purpose for them to do joint things together, like the classes, the trades together. So it's been something that's been in concept for a long time.
Right. Nice. Get time to start looking at that, because we're getting that the way that.
I think the thing we have to keep in mind though is that we have to have a high school. But that if someone were to choose that they no longer wanted to pursue that at Thomas Nelson, we still have to ensure that they have a seat at one of our high schools.
Right.
And we are having very active conversations in school liaison about, what's a tipping point number. We're trying to kind of take the politics out of it and more deal with the data. And last time we did see the high schools, we've agreed that I think we agreed, didn't we, Jim, that because the low projection number, Jim went through many years of numbers, has pretty much been spot on with enrollment. And so going on those numbers, the high schools in Jamestown is already over capacity. So using those numbers moving forward is what I think they're looking at the additions on, is what the group is talking with. And we did not get to elementary enrollment yet, but I will tell you the brief glimpse we saw of it on the screen, there was a lot of red. So, and that, again, that's based on the low enrollment projections. So, I'm sure we're going to continue to have school needs moving forward.
I think the one thing that was positive was that although they did make a decision not to spot redistrict in high schools, they made a conscious decision not to ask for trailers or additional funding in FY19, with the understanding that they really needed to get a good study and a good grip on exactly what was needed. And I told them at the meeting what I really for our benefit would like to see is a very good analysis that they would be willing to share with us about the options if they decide that they want to, instead of going to a fourth high school, to expand the existing facilities at the 3 high schools. But I would like to see, what does that do to their projections out over the years? What is the cost? So we can do a cost benefit analysis and look at that. Also look at, okay, all right, we're not going to leave the things the way they are and just build a 4th high school, so that you have an ability to make a comparison. And I think that the goal for us with the school liaison is to get that dialogue to the point where we can have, when we have a joint meeting, we can have information presented to us all well beforehand, where we can come to consensus on which way we want to go, and find some maybe unanimity on it, and then take a little of the drama out of it. I hope so.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things with what y'all been doing with the school board, and so that's come along.
And I've been very, very, very pleased with the detail they've gone into, the depth of willingness to share their thoughts and their approaches, and a good amount of debate over what are our common terms that we can define things by, so we don't have that perpetual disagreement over the accuracy of numbers or
Right.
something we can agree on.
Yeah.
And you said they're using the
low estimate. Yeah.
The low estimate, rather than the 2 different
Yes,
sets.
they've agreed to use the low estimate for both of them. But we also had to agree that what we had to do is you need to keep a constant running check on it, so that we started back into 2010 projections, which were 7-year projections, and then looked at the actual over the last 7 years to see how the actual numbers compared to what the projections were. And that's where we found that the low projections were really spot on, within about 1%. And if we need to do, have a fresh look at that at each year, because if things start to change, if the trends start to change for any reason, we want to be able to see that very quickly and both agree that, the change, either positive or negative, and be able to react to it. So, as opposed to, using a higher figure that was much less accurate out for a longer term.
Agree with that.
Yeah, but back to your original point, I agree that there is a lot of good synergy that could come from a really positive relationship with Thomas Nelson, that no matter what could free up some space at the high schools. And so hopefully, I've always found the school side willing. So I don't know what type of relationship there is now between Dr. Herron and Thomas Nelson, but I know Dr. Carroll has worked hard on that. So I hope it continues to grow.
Yeah. And mine's wasn't the thought of eliminating anything we may need as far as schools. Mine was another avenue to pursue to try to, fill some of those gaps that the students are trying to search for with our economy changing all the time.
Yeah. And to help find, a lot of school divisions, kids are leaving with their high school degree and their associates. And so trying to get us caught up to that would be good.
It would.
The strategic plan outreach committee that I'm helping sit on has been very focused on that. Dr. McLeod from Thomas Nelson has been very active, and we have some industry leaders who have been on there as well, and they're talking about trying to figure out ways to incorporate all those thoughts.
Good. Glad to hear it.
Yep. Keep vocational in there.
So, would it make sense for us to think about the different portions of the budget to raise some issues and questions that you might be interested in, or that we might be interested in, that have you give us some feedback on?
Sure.
Yeah, so I'll just take off. If you go to revenue, think about that. I'd like to get a sense of, and I know this is going to be very imprecise, but just what the trend we expect in property tax revenues over the next couple of years. And I know that you sort of shooting at a moving target. But are we starting to see changes in property assessments when we know it was a fairly modest increase this year? Was most of that growth back at the back end, or was it kind of even over the course of since the last reassessment? So just a kind of sense of where we're going with that.
Yeah, since we took the big hit in real estate assessments, that it recovered somewhat, and what we're seeing is pretty much the same rate of recovery almost every cycle, every 2-year cycle. So we get a little bit better. So if I were to take a stab in the dark, for 2 years from now, if we were under 1%, just under 1% of growth this time, I would anticipate that we hope we'd be over a 1% assessment growth the next go around. So I'm not quite sure if it would be up to 2 or not.
Right.
One of the we have been seeing really pretty stable growth in terms of what we add to the tax rolls. It's been running between 120 and 160 million in assessed value every year. So that has also been fairly stable, and it's just different type of growth. Maybe one year we might have a little bit more commercial and less residential, and then and it might switch the other way, but it has pretty much stayed in that area between 120 and 160 for growth throughout.
My sense is that our new housing stock is generally coming in at a lower price point than we would have seen, say, a decade ago.
I can check into that.
Closer to, rather than pulling up the county average, coming in closer to where the average already is.
Calculate inflation during that period.
Is it the type of housing?
Yeah, my sense is that we're seeing a decline in the sort of custom home building and more tract that it comes in at a lower price point, more attached housing, things like that. So
I think that's a good sense, but we can get some validity to that.
And with sales tax, I know that states are generally seeing sales tax revenues flat, unless we can get something done about internet sales. And the question of, the folks with discretionary income putting much more of it into services than into goods. So both of those things hit us on sales tax, but we're also growing. And so I wonder what the trend line on sales tax would be
we have
over
actually
longer term.
Projected for this two-year budget for it to be flat. If you take the premises that in investing these additional dollars in tourism marketing should bring more tourists to our area, then we should see an increase in sales tax revenue based on that. I do know that with our working efforts with the Commissioner of Revenue's office, we've really tied down ensuring that our bricks and mortar stores that are located here, that the dollars are coming here versus, so the last couple of years we've had a lot of variance because it might have been misapplied to the city of Williamsburg, and then we would recoup it in a later year. So hopefully over the next, this year and next year, we'll get some really solid numbers and are going to be able to track better the trends as to what really is a month-to-month sales revenue.
My sense is the personal property taxes that are actually collected are accelerating fairly well, right?
That probably is our percentage-wise has been the largest grower, steady grower. Whereas real estate maybe has grown 1% to 2%. Personal property has been in the 3 to 5 range consistently. So.
And I know I mentioned this to you last night, but I'll just so board is aware of it. I'd like some information about when we would be likely to see the impact of the promised additional revenue from public utilities with the construction of the Skiffs Creek. Apparently that was something beyond the ability of Dominion to accurately predict for us last year.
Yeah, I just pulled up because there was a news story this morning about the Supreme Court hearing the internet, and it seems as though the sort of the finger in the wind is that it doesn't appear that it's going to change. If comments were any indication, of course, that could totally switch, but not. It doesn't seem as though it will. But maybe we'll get lucky.
So when you talked about tourism revenue and maybe if marketing brings in more revenue, this stream of revenue for tourism, with things changing, who actually keeps track of that?
Of the money that goes to tourism?
That comes in from tourism, tourist dollars.
Which part?
The sales tax goes into the state,
Yeah.
and then it's distributed.
Yeah, the way the legislation is that even currently, all sales tax is collected by the state, and then the state distributes the 1% of the local share to us. This particular would go in a separate fund where half of it would go to this council and the other half would come here. And then as to, I thought I heard in your question, how do we know how much tourism actually brings in? And that is a little bit more of a difficult question. I don't think in all of our research we've been able to find any one area that will give you a definitive metrics as to how
do they currently measure their marketing versus what we get back? Do they?
I think the board has had a couple of presentations by the chamber, and what I've seen is that they've generally said that with our sales and meals and lodging growth, that at least some of it is associated with tourism.
Well, I think it's if they feel like they up their presence in a certain area, and then they see that people are coming from that area, the assumption is the marketing is paying off. I think it's that simple. So,
Connected to
I haven't.
Right.
I haven't not heard of any other magic way that we are.
That's simple, but very difficult for them to demonstrate because we don't really have a good sense of how much each person spends and purchases that might be subject to sales tax, for instance, or meals taxes, and then which locality they happen to spend that money in. The best indicator that I've seen that we can look to is the $2 tax, which we found that while it was relatively flat for the region, we were doing pretty well in terms of increase from year to year, which I attribute to more people staying at timeshares as opposed to traditional hotels and motels. And even though our stock is not dramatically increasing in that area, my sense is that we'll continue to see that probably be a growing source of revenue. And now, half of that $2 will go to general county purposes as opposed to going to WADMAC. So it is important for us to see how that, we do, therefore, have more of a stake in that particular tax. But metrics are tough.
especially for that.
Yeah. Especially since primarily the way we would most directly measure it would be increased visitation, and our attractions consider that proprietary information that they don't want to share, right? So kind of hard to know exactly. I'm trying to think if there are any other revenue-related. if I think of any others, I'll drop you a note.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there a board member who,
It's really difficult, I think, because we're really kind of in a holding pattern at the moment. So
How about on debt service? We're coming down again this year, right?
This was the year that we knew that we would have the large decrease, but that's where we have switched it to the school operations. And your debt service fund is on page F13, which is the very last page in the F section. And I think what you can take away from the debt service fund is we do have the planned borrowing, $15 million, that was for some large HVAC replacements in the schools, and then some of the bigger pieces of fire equipment. Programming that in, and then in FY22, programming in another debt borrowing for the new fire station and potential school expansions. What you can see is that even at the end of FY19, where we would have an ending fund balance of $7 million, by the end of FY23, that would rise to almost $13 million. So that gives the flexibility of that we would again be able to shift some dollars towards operations if there were school expansions, and we'd be able to tie that down a little bit.
And interest rates are going the other way now, so we don't get any of those credit refinancings we used to be able to benefit from.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, because I don't think it ended up changing, but when the tax law had changed, they did change it. They limited took away the advance refundings, which is where we would always see the refundings. We'd be analyzing it, watching it, and sort of timing it to get the best interest rate. Now we will have to wait until the bonds are callable. We won't be able to refund them until they're actually able to be called. So what I anticipate seeing in our next sets of borrowings is probably a little bit different structure of the bonds that I believe the markets will adapt to the tax law changes to try to come up with maybe different types of scenarios as to maybe shorter, terms for calling, or I'll do something different that still will allow us to be able to take advantage of, maybe interest rate swings in the future. I think going back to overall operations, I know that this particular budget document, a couple of things, hopefully you notice that the budget document is laid out a little bit differently. It's got hopefully a lot more information for everyone.
And more pictures.
So hopefully a little bit more user-friendly, a little bit more information available to people to read. But there's a lot of changes internally. There are a lot of consolidations in stormwater and environmental consolidated. And then there was some shifting of reporting areas, like video services went to IRM, information technology. And so you sort of see the effect of some wide swings, but overall, when you come back to the summary pages, it still sort of breaks down where the increase in spending is.
Could I ask about Virginia Municipal League? Is there any? There's not a. I didn't notice any change in our dues and memberships that would have reflected re-enrollment in the amount.
That's correct. It's not in there to pay dues to them.
Could we get could we request from them information about what that would cost?
Sure.
I also did want to mention to the members of the board, I had a conversation with members of the Williamsburg Arts Commission about their funding requests and support that we provided relative to the city, I guess. And I'm not sure the entire genesis of this, but apparently a few years back, we were, both the city and the county were contributing roughly the same amount, or exactly the same amount, to the Arts Commission, and then somehow or another, maybe we reduced our contribution by $5,000, and for a few years, the city has been making up that $5,000 reduction that we've had. I'd like us to restore that $5,000 in this year's budget, just so that we are contributing the equivalent amount as a city. An increasing number of the activities and participants in the Arts Commission funded events and organizations are county residents, and it only seems fair to do at least that modest change. That would be about $5,000.
And this is page C82, and we had budgeted $70,000.
Right.
For that.
Right. And I think the city has been budgeting 75 and then coming up with an additional 5,000 when we don't match that.
Just out of curiosity, do we have in the budget to pay for membership in VACO?
Yes, we do.
Where's that located?
That's in the
Probably under our-
board.
Yeah.
I think it's under
Under the Board of Supervisors.
Oh, under the board, okay.
Dues and
Under the
membership.
board of
Yeah.
memberships.
No wonder I was looking in the wrong spot.
Yeah, we're not paid that much. That's just
It's coming out of your check, my friend.
here's your 3 cents. When you look at that, you're like, wow.
Sue, I was looking at the drop in 10,000 for Community Action Agency. Could you explain why that is?
I believe last year, the proposed budget did not include MBL funding for the neighborhood basketball league, and then that came back to you as a separate appropriation later in the year. And so this budget is not proposing the funding of MBL.
His last year.
Yeah, because last year it came back later and we funded it.
Right.
So this one does not include it as well.
That's correct.
And that's the difference in that amount right there.
Anticipating that they're going to come back again.
Was that in their request to us this year?
I believe they did request it, yes.
They requested to leave it out.
And
No, they
requested
funded.
Oh, I was
Funding
gonna
for
say.
Well, my guess is if it comes back to us, we will again decide to fund it. So we might want to at least put that
Yeah, I
on
mean, didn't they? There were issues, I believe, but
There
or
were.
not
Yeah, I know what you're saying. There was some,
concerns.
Yes.
And have those been answered, or
I believe Mr. Carnifex is out in the hallway. You might want to call him in.
Mr. Carnifex?
I'm going to be Thursday. I can find out too.
Okay, all right.
yeah, it was.
Oh, I hate for Mr. Carnifex.
Yeah, I think we had.
Oh, here he comes. Wow,
hoped
looky
for-
there.
For some information about the level of participation by county residents.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
what it
forth.
was. So what does Muncie County participation?
Yeah,
And-
Rebecca's here in case there's some other questions. She served on the allocation review team. But if you remember back when NBL started, it was targeted for low-income neighborhoods. And they were doing educational programs, and it was on a Friday and a Saturday evening. We were tracking it. It was very structured. Over the years, it's changed to more of a recreational league. And when we look at the demographics, there were less than 30% of the participants, and they have dropped, were coming from the low-income neighborhoods. And so then the fees, they were charging fees. We've been providing space. We've been providing a lot of in-kind services. And at one time, the county was contributing to pay for the officials, and that's where the $10,000 was going. So in the past few years, we've looked at this, and we've determined that it's a good program. Don't get me wrong. It's a Friday and a Saturday night. It's a good program. But we don't subsidize our other recreational leagues. They pay the county $15 a head to play in baseball, soccer, lacrosse, field hockey, whatever it is at War Hill. So how do you see the dilemma that we're in? Mm-hmm. How do we not fund these other programs? We provide the lights and we provide the facilities, and that's what we're doing with NBL. They are allowed to come into the gym. We actually supply a staff person, and they operate that league. So that's the kind of the dilemma we're in. It is a recreational league. When it first started, it was targeting our low-income neighborhoods, which is a strategy that we're looking at and we're trying to address. But when you only have 25 to 30% that are coming into participating in the program coming from low-income neighborhoods, do we just write their fee off, like our discount program? And that's what we've tried to do over the last year or two.
How does that compare to our regular rec league participation rates?
That's a good question. You know, we don't see all of the youth league. They have a discount program. To be a partner with us, they have to write that fee off just like we do if they qualify. And all of our sports groups do that if they participate in it and they qualify. But I can't tell you the exact number that baseball or football or any of our organizations write off, but they do. It's part of the requirement to be a partner. So that's kind of the dilemma we're in is we subsidize this program, but we don't subsidize the other recreational leagues.
And then they're also charging for the facility as well. We're not charging.
We're not charging.
But they were.
And I believe they continue to charge an admission fee.
Oh, they were charging admission fees to come and watch the games at the rec center.
I see.
And you know, at one time they were having, which kind of raised the issue several years ago, they were having a big banquet at the end and spending some significant dollars on it, which is not normally what the county contributes. We don't, if the other organizations have a banquet, it comes out of the fees or fundraisers that they do. So, you know, the county contributing to it in the beginning when it was predominantly a low-income neighborhood program that was started that included educational and other things, and now it's transitioned over 15 years to a recreational league.
So one of the challenges we always have is that this seems like a good program. We don't want to discourage an opportunity for young people to have an opportunity to play basketball in the evenings, on the weekends, when there might not be other things that are available, healthy activities to engage in. Is there any possibility of basically offering to them the same set of guidelines and rules and basically saying, if you want to be considered for any kind of support, that you need to provide that? And I would be interested in just knowing the degree of participation that we have of low-income residents in any of the programs that
and we have the data from the last year's league and this one this year that show that, so we can provide that. You can see that.
Yeah,
so I think that's
really
what we're
thinking of the other
others,
groups, right? Maybe just as part of their annual application to utilize the facilities, just ask them how many scholarships they gain.
And we do. We have that.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think that's the dilemma we're in.
I recognize that's
a positive program. We should continue to support it.
Yeah.
But should we give direct tax dollars to that when we don't the other organizations?
Right.
And I will say we are, in addition to the in-kind for the facilities and social services, we are assisting with background checks for coaches. So we are paying for the background checks. So we recognize that CAA is in a time of transition. So we're assisting them in that and other ways to help offset some of the costs for their programs. So we want them to continue to provide the programs, but there are certain things that we can help them with other than NBL as well.
And then one of the things we've discussed is if the family applies for the financial assistance, and just like we do, we would waive the fee. If NBL needs that difference back, that would be a way that the county could. Part of our strategic plan is to support those neighborhoods. Then you're clearly identifying tax dollars that go to a family in a low-income neighborhood so they can participate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think my concern would be satisfied if we can basically offer the opportunity to participate in the same way as other organizations do, but then also sort of see if we are getting additional benefits for low-income citizens through the existence of this particular one. I mean, maybe 30% is high compared to the other organizations. My guess is probably is a little high.
It probably is higher.
Level of participation.
But we can pull those.
But certainly I also think, I mean, I think you guys are very sensitive to these issues and care about them a lot. So I don't really want to put ourselves in the middle of a rational program and set of guidelines.
And one of the things that we're looking at for next year's budget is the whole financial assistance program. If one of our strategies is to better serve our low-income neighborhoods, instead of, if you live in a demographic area, instead of applying and giving us your tax numbers and doing all of that, maybe we look at our whole financial assistance program. If you live in this demographic area, you qualify for a 50% discount, So I think that's something we need to look at that too in the future. And that would impact us. And that's one of the things that I hear is that people won't, because of this amount of documents you have to provide to get the discount. Sometimes it's challenging.
Well, good for now. Save the rest for next time.
You understand the board believe it is here.
Yes.
How about, what's the,
Again, information that might be available for us next time. The trend line beyond we have basically 2 years here, right? Trend line on the ambulance, ALS, BLS fees, right? Just interested.
On the ambulance call. On the ambulance call.
Yep. Well, on the reimbursement. From
reimbursement.
Insurance reimbursement.
And when you put that second ambulance at Station 4, those fees will go up because Williamsburg won't be backfilling for us. So, right.
Let me. Go ahead, John.
Yes.
Even awkward silence. Let's talk a little bit about additional staffing, just so that we can have a discussion here about it, and any citizens who are watching are aware. We're adding some staff to planning. Is that right? Can we talk about that a little bit? My sense is in the last couple of years has been we've been running very thin in our planning staff. And,
if you look at page G4, it's at the very end of your packet that lists budgeted employment data from 2011 to up to 2020. We were at the height of the boom. We were at about 12 and a half planning folks. We dropped down to 10, and we've been operating at 10 for some time. Until this last year, we were 9 with one part-time person. This budget proposes changing that part-time person to full-time, and then adding 1 planning staff member. I'd like to refer back to the beginning when I talked about telling the whole story. I think most folks consider planning to be site plan, subdivision review, and the cases that come before the board, height waivers, SUPs, and rezonings. That is really only a fraction of the work that our wonderful planning team does. It also incorporates all of the long-range planning we do, the comprehensive plan update that we're getting ready to undertake. All the transportation projects require oversight. We work closely with housing on those sorts of things as well, and I think Paul can probably elaborate on the specific items that we've added the plan for. coming up?
Yeah, we've got a number of those items. Jason mentioned a little bit about some of the historical staffing. Since fiscal year 10, the planning division's lost 5 positions. When times are good, you ramp up, and when times are not good, you ramp back down, and that's fine. That's normal, and that's to be expected. We actually have the same staff now as we did in 2001 when the county had a population of about 48,000. So as we're trying to do more, as we identify some of these other items that takes a lot of staff effort to get done beyond some of the current planning, the transportation projects, revisiting a lot of items in the code. We're doing the joint land use study, which are some current examples. We're trying to also provide a lot more types of projects that allow for that community input. The Long Hill Corridor Study, the Moortown Road Corridor Study, the Pocahontas Trail Multimodal Corridor Study. And again, those are some previous examples over the previous years. But again, moving forward, we've got a big comp plan update when you look at a lot of the other operational initiatives planned for over the next series of 5 years. There is a lot, and as Jason mentioned, we're into new areas that we haven't historically been in, trying to leverage the ever-changing VDOT and state process to land us $100 million worth of roadway improvement projects over the last couple of years. So I think some of that time and that investment has really worked well. We hear it more sometimes in the context of building permits and tax revenue growth, but when we talk about growth, for the last 4 or 5 years, we have sustained about a 15% increase in the current planning activity that we're working with as well in terms of site plans. And, there's always an ongoing request and desire to balance speed with quality. And as we try to do more with character and the quality of life items, we're always adding in those bits and parts into the ordinance to try to reflect the desires of the community and things we hear back as public input. All of those incrementally add more and more staff time. So, again, as we try to stay responsive on the staff times, as we try to engage more, as we try to provide more quality and more detail, it all adds up to needing some additional hours at the staff level.
And as we found with the police, it's better to be proactive than reactive. Oftentimes in the planning game, if something is ready to be built, there's not much we can do. Or if we encounter transportation problems, it's a bigger fix after the fact. So having some additional resources up front is helpful for our long-term goals.
With the community development portfolio, a lot of the growth you're seeing now that driving some of those needs for increased fire and police calls, we're usually on the front end of that. A lot of that is an outcropping of a lot of the hard work that we've done over the years. And so we're not seeing some of the big spikes in population growth as we've done, but our growth is still continuing at 1.4–1.5%. So we're still moving along.
So 1.5% translates into over 20% over the course of a decade. Yeah. And that's
we've gone down.
And our base of population has gotten so much larger that means in terms of real bodies, a big chunk of additional people.
I always think it's interesting to think about our
personnel in terms of employees per 1,000 residents or something like that. And I think we've really seen a pretty flat or maybe even declining.
It's actually been a decline. We got asked that question the other day. It was about 100. I shouldn't even say that. It was about 100 employees per.
100, yeah.
I mean, 1 employee per 100 citizens,
right.
And now it's 1 employee for 102 citizens.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're at 1.9.
I mean, 1.9.
Yes.
So then that was based on 2016. So.
High fever.
Yeah.
And plus with transportation, years ago, you didn't have that. So now you're spending a day there and not including all the time behind the desk, working those deals out, with the HR TAC and all that.
Yeah, and we're investing a lot more time into the applications process, generating the data, generating the back support. You know, it's not like the county budget process. We sort of have this window here, but that process really is like a year long before you kind of get to this point, right? So, yeah, it is. There's a lot. And then you've got to manage those on the backside.
Right.
Just because you get the money doesn't mean the work stops. So.
Yeah. Just starts in.
That's coming up in June.
So, again, maybe this would be just point of information. I understand that there's planning underway to think about the expansion of the regional library or to another facility. And I don't remember what our contractual arrangement is for capital.
The capital is borne by the jurisdiction by where the facility is being constructed.
And so I'm assuming that that facility would be in James City County.
Well, it's interesting because the city is looking at expansion to the present library or a site next to it, moving to about 50,000 square feet. We have in out years of the capital budget one in James City County. Probably this is a place to start talking about that if the board is interested in talking with the city about instead of building two and increasing that operating cost as much for two facilities. Should we talk about somehow coming to an agreement on building one?
Now, the library does have a really interesting map that shows where the card holders are coming from to the various libraries, and it looks like at least from James City County's perspective, a lot are coming from the John Tyler Highway area all the way over to the Ford's Colony area. So, be it between Centerville and those two roads, that's where we're seeing a lot of usage from the library, and there's just not a lot of services.
The library in the city.
The library in the city.
That's correct.
Does York County still use?
Yes. York County is a member of the library.
Are they interested in building one?
And their population, they have not grown like we have. Or, and
Most of the population's down in the south end of the county.
Yeah, you want a library moving down there.
they were talking about one time about whether to build one up here or
Just
to
stay
join
with.
the library, and they decided to join the Wienerberg Regional Library.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where there's, I didn't even realize there was room near the city library,
Well, they're talking, across the street
like we're,
next to Blanton.
okay,
The other thing is they're looking at expanding the police department.
okay,
So that's getting right tight.
That's tight down.
They'd have to go
Yeah.
far.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
With parking and all.
I've been since the board, I'm more than happy to sit down and talk to the city manager, but
It would make sense, though, in the long run. It's like schools. There's an operating cost to having two facilities.
yes.
And if it's expansion or a new facility in the city would be something that would still effectively serve our constituents, it's worth talking to them about participating, possibly.
But that facility it's nowhere to park, and it's
I
getting
know.
worse.
I know.
And if I was going to partner, I'd want to see a facility move somewhere else, or if not in James City County, so that we would have some parking and be able to, because it's tight.
One of the interesting things about the agreement is that under the agreement, the library administration has to be in the city. But that's the way the agreement was written. Right now,
Wrote these in.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Annex the land.
And that's it.
Yeah. That was, I'm not going to say it. Moving on. Be nice.
I did want to draw the board's attention to the fact that our expenditures of the regional jail are down by
Yes.
$200,000, mostly because it's paid off.
But the other thing is, our numbers are looking better.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, our numbers are decreasing at the jail, but they're increasing for colonial behavioral health. So,
Well, in all honesty, that's
Probably
probably a good trade-off.
Yeah.
Because they're getting the treatment they need at actually at a lower cost.
Yeah.
Better deal. Yeah. In fact, that is an area where, I don't mean for this very moment, but I hope that maybe the board would think strategically about whether increasing our local commitment to mental health funding would be something we'd be interested in considering down the line. I don't mean just to jump into it willy-nilly this year, but to maybe start thinking about it over the course of the next year or two, because I do think that that's one of our more persistent problems that has effects on all sorts of services that we deal with.
Well, yeah, because I think our contribution to, right, it's increased because of the number of James City County citizens, right?
Yeah, I sit on the CBH board, and we're in the 4th year of some really good, better data as to where the users are coming from. So we're trying to get to the 5-year rolling average that is what juvenile detention and the jail use. And during the downturn, it's my understanding that CBH sort of kept all the localities flat in their contributions to them, and so things had gotten a little askew. So we have been trying to make up that difference every year. So particularly this year, I believe we're the only one funding an increase out of all the localities, but we're still not at the point of paying our percentage of our usage. We anticipate that we'll have one more year of a really high increase, and then we'll get back to where all the jurisdictions are sort of sharing based on their 5-year rolling average. So,
all right.
I was just going to say, in terms of health services, I just would also point out that Old Town is continuing to function very effectively as a service provider, but is obviously watching carefully the developments in Richmond, and the challenge is that we really don't have much idea of what the impact will be if we have Medicaid expansion, because on the one hand, it may mean that more people can come in and have coverage for their services. On the other hand, those services may be taken to other places because other physicians and medical services may accept that payment.
That's a good point.
HRPDC went up 3,000.
that would be based on our population in there. It's a formula. Yeah, it's a formula-driven request.
And we're the lowest payer on Harampa too, out of the region.
They got to come up with a better acronym. It's just like clearing your throat.
Oh, man. All right. Anything else? John?
Sorry.
Yeah. Great job. So, do you think you have enough to move forward?
I think we have enough directions. Anybody have any staff have questions? We bring you back some options after we find out what happens.
Okay.
You would expect to have a pretty good feel of what the final thing is by Thursday.
The Senate bill? Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Assuming that the regular session or the reconvened session goes the way most of them do, it'll be a one-day session.
Okay.
So we'll have a good idea of that.
Well, I guess my question then for you is, with the guidance we've given you here,
we will bring you back some options.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there, before we get to the next work session, hopefully you'll be able to come back to us with some of the things we've asked for laid out so that we can maybe have a few email exchanges and stuff prior to coming in.
Yeah, we'll certainly try to do that.
Okay.
I know in terms of the impossible tasks, I've asked you to think about, Sue, was one a while ago about any guesstimate of what share of the sales tax comes from residents versus visitors.
That was a pretty difficult task.
Yeah.
We had done some research. We looked at BTC to see if they had anything, and we really were not able to find any type of data that I'd be able to say this is how much comes from residents versus this much.
It's not very accurate, but maybe we can look at on a monthly basis on what happens during the season and the shoulder season. That's not very accurate, but it's probably the closest thing you'll get. That we can get.
Think the chamber would have anything? Be able to come up with any numbers? They seem to be able to come up with numbers.
We can find that.
Yeah, I mean, you almost have to look at like something like the Harris Teeter by War Hill, or the restaurants like when that Panera, on a sports weekend. You know what I mean?
But we can't get that detailed information.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So that means because really it would be really hard. The McDonald's by Busch Gardens.
I mean, it's just
yeah.
Because we're all still in there too.
Yeah. Well, true. You'd have to
register and resident.
I'm thinking that the only way that you can come close is by doing shoulder season. And it's not accurate, but it's...
You get some idea.
Yeah.
Well, even if it was just a matter of, sort of what an average visitor spends, might give you some kind of clue. Then you have to figure out how many visitors we have.
I do know that our economic development department is looking at there may be some services out there, that may be able to capture some information.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure, but we are looking into being able to hopefully do something moving forward. Going backwards is the more difficult part of it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be
It is just taking a shot in the dark.
tough. Yeah.
Do we feel pretty comfortable about the degree to which we have been able to correct the state's records in terms of where sales taxes are directed?
Yes, and we have a process going on right now monthly where the commissioner's office, it's an automated process with our IT department. They go through the data, send it to them. It spits out the anomalies for them so that instead of previously they had to go and try to find the anomalies and then be able to see if it was true or not. Now it sort of spits them out for them, so they're only looking at maybe monthly 20 records versus, thousands of records. And so it's much more accurate. And then they're able to address it right away versus, where it would take, they may not find it for years, and then we have to be going back years to be able to do that. So,
do you have can you tell us what's happening with what Ms. Mellon was just talking about?
With being able to track some of our
yes.
So there are, and we're talking with some now. There are companies that basically they kind of mine data using analytics. They use mobile analytics, so they use basically your cell phone pings. They also will use credit card data, and this allows you to get a better idea of where your visitors are coming from for both tourism and retail, where they're staying, how long they're staying, what their their shopping and spending habits are, where they come from. So it seems like a lot of.
Facebook all over again.
It is. I will caution and say, services like that aren't inexpensive to get, to be able to pay for those. But there are locations, Hilton Head and similar competitors, Charleston, that use similar consultant companies to provide that. So I actually have one coming in later this week. We're going to be talking with a few others and just see what is out there.
Not Cambridge Analytica.
No, it's not. I think what would be ideal would be if we do decide to try to pursue something like that, especially because of the costs and because of the relationship we have with our partner localities, is that we do it as a region, because that, again, those customers, they're going to be all over the region, and that way is sort of an economy of scale. But we can provide more information as we start to get some of the information from these companies. So.
That's interesting that's being done. So we may have already traveled somewhere where we're being
on to you, honey.
Yeah,
and they won't necessarily identify exactly who the person or individual is.
Right.
It gives sort of a general location, so within a small radius of where that closest ping is. But they'll from that be able to know basically where your phone typically resides, where you typically are during the day. So in a general vicinity. But again, what it does is it could tell us, are we getting most of our travelers now coming from Ohio? Are they coming from Northern Virginia? Where are they coming from? And when they're not here, what do they like to do when they're back at home? Where do they shop? Where do they eat? So maybe what are we missing in our market? So it's good targeted data to not only give you an idea of what you have, but where you should focus your marketing interest. So and your recruitment in tourism and retail. So
okay,
it's scary.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's scary, but for somebody who loves statistics, I think it's fascinating. So
yeah, that's interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll be turning my phone off from here on.
It won't matter. It's still recording.
Yeah. Gee, Merry Christmas.
All right.
For now.
All right, so we are going to adjourn until 4 p.m. on April 24th, 2018 for our next budget work session. And
Motion for adjournment?
Right. Well, in just 1 second.
Oh, okay.
Just with the follow-up being that we will hear from administration Thursday at some point, if not Thursday, Friday, with what we're looking at. Okay, sure.
No. Motion for adjournment?
All right, Mr. Porter?
Mr. Hip, aye. Mr. Eisenhower, Mr. McMillan, Mr. Sandlin, Mr. Hall.
Aye.
Now,